I'm I'm Andrew Pym from Servian, and this is between two ferns, Servian style. So I'd like to welcome Danny from Omneo. Danny, good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
We've also got Pete Gatt lurking in the background. Who hasn't bothered to do his hair today, so he just thought he'd put a hat on. So he might jump in from time to time.
Hi, Andrew, you didn't do your hair today either, mate. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Actually, Pete, I did. I had to shape it up. I see you. Nice. I'm not sure if you did that, but anyway. So Danny, tell us about your business and your platform, just as a place to get started.
Yeah, sure. Like all good platforms that are built, I think it was born out of an agency. So we've been running as an agency for a couple of decades now, mainly in the sort of CX retail customer experience space. Started as a design firm that grew up into advertising, into e-commerce and digital and marketing and all of those things, but really in the last 5 years focused on this concept of customer experience. We found that about 10 years ago, we were really struggling to stitch together a lot of the experiences between online, in-store, marketing, customer service. There's always gaps. This is sort of before CDPs and even CRMs to a degree were focused on different things. So we ended up building this platform. It started out as just Arcade's loyalty engine. It was just a bit of code that we reused all over the place to deliver loyalty programs for a couple of retail clients. But we sort of realized that we're onto something. We didn't see anything else in the market that was kind of close to what we were doing. So Omneo was born out of that. So Omneo.io, which is our CX platform, was born out of that. And it's come out to its 10th year this year. But it's only really been 4 or 5 years that we've given it its own name, its own team, its own platform. It was a collection of code strewn across a few different platforms to start with. And then about 6 years ago, it became its own dedicated stack of technology based on Amazon server technology. It was a Elastic Beanstalk application and Postgres database. Then I think we're up to version 3 at the moment. So about a year and a half ago, we replatformed the entire architecture onto a MySQL-based database, and I'm still running mainly as PHP, a Laravel application, but it was starting to adopt some of that microservice architecture with some of the parts of it were starting to break off and become their own thing. So we're sort of ending up with this fragmentation where some parts of the application were progressing into the new way of build, the new way of working, and some other parts were starting to get sort of dragged back, and also having new developers and new team members come and work on it, sort of changed attitudes and approaches and ideas about how things should work. So the platform started out as very much an instance-based application. It was installed on an Amazon stack, but it wasn't a central SaaS platform. So we'd have an Amazon instance spun up for a particular client. We'd install all the application on there, even to a point where, because Amazon was costing what it was costing, and we weren't really that good at necessarily optimizing or getting trying to sell to the client to commit to reserved instances or anything like that. It was just, you just pay by the month for your own hosting and we'll put the thing on there. But it ended up becoming quite an expensive exercise. I'm sure we could have fixed that through optimization. But even the act of optimizing it or getting into contracts, if the client get into contracts with Amazon, did sort of get, it's a complex sale, and we're not trying to sell to marketing departments why they should be optimizing their Amazon stacks to reduce hosting costs. So it all got very complicated. But look, it was, in hindsight's a wonderful thing. Leading up to that point, it all made complete logical sense. And I still feel like even up until that point, we were still doing a pretty good job with very small team of resources to deliver quite a sophisticated technology piece to a lot of Australian retailers here to connect their customers and their customer data and customer experiences together. So it was interesting, but as things changed over the last couple of years, the idea of spending as much time on the infrastructure and the architecture that hosted the platform was just starting to sort of become bigger and bigger. So that's sort of how we got to this scenario in the first place.
What was the sort of key bit that sort of made you start thinking about needing to kind of shift gears to look at kind of wrapping your arms around it and obviously making all of that sort of underlying tech simpler for them to, take your offering forward?
Yeah, look, I think it actually started with the development team itself. I think we've got a really, a really smart group of guys that know how to put forward opportunities. When everyone, like all people, you want to play with the latest and greatest, new code languages, new frameworks, new hosting opportunities, all those things. Every now and again, those things come up. But I think our guys are pretty balanced in understanding that we never just do that for the sake of it. And they were really good at articulating that there were some big opportunities for us to be able to step forward and try a new way of architecting the application, architecting the way it's hosted and delivered, even to the point of thinking about how we price it. It was always a bit of a pain point that we charge a license fee, but then they also have to pay for their own hosting of a platform. For a lot of clients, that was good too. So I think it was a combination of the developers, our development team deciding that there was a better way and sort of putting forward a fairly solid case for a different way of approaching the architecture. And even then, that was sort of pre-Google. Or moving to Google was more still about the architecture needed to be fundamentally different. But also from a pricing model point of view, as we're sort of trying to evolve this away from into a fully SaaS-based product, then we knew that hosting had to disappear, that hosting shouldn't be the concern of the client. So I think the combination of rethinking about our licensing and hosting costs and the developers wanting a new way of working, sort of those planets aligned and said, well, we need to think about moving this to a place where we are going to bear the hosting costs, so therefore we need to have much more control over that.
Okay, and so how did that? Obviously, that come to you. I assume you popped it or something like that. But how did you kind of look at the options and then kind of size the kind of business case up to look at? Was it organic or was there kind of a big kind of plan and
I'd like to say it was a big scientific plan with like lots and lots of spreadsheets, but it really wasn't. I think once we got, we still base a lot of business decisions on hunch and anecdote to start with, at least to pick a direction, and then you go in there and validate those things. It was sort of around this point that we started realizing that we were making some choices that maybe were a bit out of our depth in making. And while the developers were saying, yep, this is all looking good, I've done some research on GCP versus Amazon. All the guys were very well versed with Amazon, so they knew that they could deliver the solution based in Amazon. But there's a couple of key things up front that sort of really made them choose to go down one part. Like containerization was a huge, big component of what they wanted to do, and they decided that the Kubernetes-based architecture was where they wanted to head. But the Kubernetes solution was much more advanced on Google than what it was on Amazon at the time. So that was probably at least the first trigger point to go look at Google and find out, if we use it for that part of the solution, will it stack up for everything else that we need to do and more, and where we're planning to go? Is there any sort of dead ends or paint ourselves into a corner moments that we might get to? So I think there was, just by sense checking, just A/B checking that one key feature of the Kubernetes support made us take Google seriously to start with. But then we realized that, well, we've got a whole team of developers that have got years of experience working in Amazon environments that have got zero experience in Google. Everything looks good on the tin, but we know that underneath in the day-to-day operations of things, is this going to be, we're going to create a nightmare for ourselves if we don't have any experience in there. So we sort of got to that point where everything looked right, all the freely available materials that we could, everything's very well documented, so you could do some digging. Guys were building proof of concepts to just push it around a bit and sense that it was all okay. And a lot of the first cut of that we did ourselves. And I guess even then we go, well, this is all looking good, it makes sense. We sort of started going, you could look the developers in the eye and say, well, have we made the right choice here? Like, if this all turns to shit in a year's time, this is your choice.
We see a lot of Australian businesses are really reluctant to kind of get any kind of external help. They kind of want to hold it and do things themselves. So, how did that sort of materialize, like with your team, about wanting to get that external viewpoint?
Look, I think it's
obviously help de-risk what you're doing and make it happen.
Yeah, look, it is a case where I think if we had have just said to the dev team and the architecture team, like, do you think this is the right choice? Do you need any help? They were sort of saying, I don't think we need help. It was never like, no, we definitely don't. We've got this. It was like, I don't think. Like, I'm sure we would have been fine to a degree without it, but I think we're probably at least 2 years ahead by making the choice we ended up making in the end, which I'll get to. But at that point, it was, for me, sort of managing the team, I was definitely out of my depth technically, but you could sort of sense that they were sort of saying, yes, we want to do this and we can do this. We've got this. We think we've done enough research and we understand what we're doing. But given that they're going to have the weight of the entire application on their shoulders, I felt like making them have the weight of that choice as well was just too much, even though they were putting their hands up for it. I felt, as a sort of manager of the product, knowing that with a very small team already, that taking that, even if it's just a mental load and that responsibility, I think it's asking a lot of people that might be doing the right thing in saying that they've got your back and they can do it. But also just from a risk point of view, it was less about the investment risk, but more about the idea of, well, if we do this and they do get hit by a bus or things do change. I mean, I think back in 2 years ago when we started, or a year ago, we made this choice, it was an employee's market. There's always a better option out there. So even though everyone's got the absolute purest intentions to stick this out, say with the project, at any point that could change. So in order to maintain a small, nimble team of very well experienced and connected developers and architects, then you need to almost de-risk it by having another party involved to hold continuity if things change. So it was initially, it was born out of the fact that I felt that asking a small team of developers to take responsibility for the product as well as all these major architecture choices was just too much to ask. I think it's not fair. It's not fair to make them hold that responsibility and that stress when they go to sleep at night. And I didn't even know where to start looking for this sort of stuff. So luckily I actually met Pete at a mutual sort of business networking type thing where we just started trading stories about things, and he just basically described a service that I didn't even know existed, that you could get someone out there that's specifically focused on helping companies make these choices. But then it very quickly became not just help us make the choice, but help us make the choice, help us lift and shift our technology, but also build us some DevOps tools that we didn't even know we needed, so that we can free up my limited development team to spend a lot more time on actually building product. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So which is one of the main reasons of moving to Google too, is spend more time on product and less time on infrastructure.
So how successful was Pete? Because obviously he helped your team, he helped you get out of the line, but he didn't, save your beard from turning grey or losing a bit of, stuff on top.
I think I was the cause of the grey beard. I'm happily taking ownership of that. It looks stunning, by the way, Danny.
Yeah, thank you. I've really been working on it.
Yep.
But look, I mean, as soon as Pete sold the dream, I think this is the first time I've seen him since those drinks. So I mean, he hasn't actually done anything at all to help at all in getting anything done. Like, it was his generals and soldiers that were there. Like, he's literally been pretty much next to useless in the whole process. But sometimes all you need is a dream to keep fighting. So I think he did a really good job of keeping that motivation in there for the. No, I'm joking. Look, I think and obviously Pete navigating his own changes from moving from Vibrato to Servian as well. There's a lot going on that side of the fence. And obviously I think the Servian guys probably saw the same things that we saw in not only Pete, but the Vibrato team. I think those guys were out on site with us a couple of days a week during the changeover. They were on Slack. We were able just to, it wasn't a big mechanical, account managed process, even though there was those layers of control there. But when it came down to it, it was just, 3 well-meaning developers on our side dealing with, 2 or 3 well-meaning specialist developers on their side, just getting the job done in a very, very practical way.
I think to that point as well, Andrew, one of the things I saw work really well. So to your question before about organisations in Australia being a bit reluctant to, get support and stuff like that, where I've seen that work is where the teams are actually quite advanced but are open to it. So we always carry through the conversation, and Danny, you would have heard us say this a million times, which is the strong opinions loosely held. Yeah. So we've definitely got opinionated views of what we've seen in the past and what we think brings that experience to the table. But we've
got that mental agility to let it go too, right?
Yeah, and I think when you're working with really smart people like the Omneo crew, who are guns, and to be completely fair, this was very much, we helped fast track, yeah. So we helped get that capability in quickly, whereas I no question that the team in Omneo Group could have done it, just would have been over an extended period of time, right? So this just helped facilitate getting it there and getting that knowledge transfer. Yeah, so and it's been interesting as well, because I think Omneo's organizations are like the product business itself can be fast paced and moving. It's not like Danny was saying, it's not a ridiculously large team, but it's probably a bit of a sideways question. But Danny, do you see inside of that sort of area, like I can't recall the number of people that we had in the team, in terms of some of the changes and stuff that occurred throughout the team, do you think it would have been any different if the team was much larger, or do you think those same sort of practices would have worked in terms of some of that education part?
Look, I actually don't think it was our capacity that we were. I mean, there's a few parts of the project which is quite interesting in that it was first about the intellectual property, and that just those yes, definitely go that way, yes, definitely don't do that. So that certainty, like that, the certainty part was one thing. You did by having your guys do a lot of the work. We actually were able just to, we were effectively outsourcing stuff that we probably could have done for a certain part of the work as well. So it was a combination of, and I think making sure that our team understood that that's all we were doing, that we know you can do this, but these guys can't do what you do. So how about you let them do that?
Really so
so I think it was about sort of making sense of the fact that this was about folding over some resources so that we can compress the timeline of moving things. For us to move was to get the danger that we had is if we did this too slowly, we'd have of the dozen or so instances running that would have an extended period of time with half of them on Amazon and half of them on Google, which means the day-to-day maintenance of everything just becomes even more complicated. Whereas we managed to get, I think, nearly all of them done in the space of 6 months. And a lot of that involved careful negotiation with the clients, because it wasn't a zero impact on them. We had to change IP addresses and whitelistings and integrations. So it wasn't just a switch on the back end. It was, there was impacts to retailers that typically don't want to spend money or time on anything that doesn't give them some noticeable front end change.
And so where are you at? I was just going to say, so where are you at now? So obviously you've been through those changes. You've got through the kind of core bit. Obviously the vision is around more agility based on Kubernetes and fast development cycles. More cost effectiveness in terms of more density of bringing things together in a SaaS-based model. Is that sort of bearing fruit? Is it what you expected, or are there other things that have you found?
It's helped us, as far as speed to market with a few features. It's been really helpful, but it's also opened Pandora's box. So in a good way. So we're now not just talking about optimizations on top of our Laravel stack. We're talking about V4. So now it's all about throw the whole thing in the bin and let's re-architect the whole thing based on Google Cloud Functions and all these other amazing things because we've got all So it's just as we got everyone aligned on V3 and everything's looking good now. V4 in our world, which is completely a more microservice architecture, will give us even more hosting cost optimizations, but also provide a lot of new capabilities to our clients, and moving away from sort of a REST-based approach into a more GraphQL approach, and linking and opening up some other doorways into other parts of the Google ecosystem outside of this, Google Cloud walled garden, actually out into the other parts of the ecosystem, which I think clients are clamoring for. So, I think it's things are always going to keep changing, and I think that's why you do these things. But to see that happening so quickly and seeing the guys go off and build some proof of concepts in their own time of what the V4 architecture might look like because they want to, it's interesting, and they're not fighting the servers the whole way to get it done, is a pretty radical outcome of all of this, which we're pretty pumped about.
So when I moved from microservices with an agile processes, good team, that we were able to get the stack right and the release trains going. Off the estimates we had, we're at least 40% more effective in time pushing features through the pipeline, and you could get to the point where you are releasing a lot more frequently. Are there any kind of stats that you've got that kind of articulates how much faster you're moving or more effective?
Yeah. Look, I think we're definitely 40% saving on hosting costs. So our overall, when you combine what clients are paying,
and we've seen that number a couple of times actually. Yeah, when you condense it down. Yeah,
definitely. So there's that. We've got about I think the guys are saying about 70% reduction in provisioning new clients. So when it comes to provisioning a whole new Omneo stack and integrations, it's a portion of the time. We're talking days instead of weeks, and in some cases hours. So like there's some parts of the setup that have just radically reduced in size. From a deployment point of view, again, with the process that the guys have put there, we're doing things more asynchronously. They can sort of set things off to go and deploy. And we've got some clients that got very complex environments where they've got 3 or 4 different environments that we need to maintain concurrently, and all those things can be just done in an automated way. So yeah, we're talking every day probably an hour's worth of savings on our developers who are just sitting there waiting for stuff to happen. Now they can deploy stuff. So we're deploying new features to the application or to parts of the application every week at the moment.
Cool.
So and it could be every day, and it wouldn't really be a big stretch. So there's been weeks where there's been 3 or 4 releases in a given week. So that's that would have been a whole, let's free up a week at the end of August to do that big release of stuff that we want to do. Yeah.
Cool. And so look, if you had to do it differently again, like what would you do differently with the benefit, obviously with the benefit of hindsight?
I still think because we were being cautious about getting other third parties involved in it and wanting to really take ownership of a lot of the stuff. Even the way we worked with the vibrato guys, I still feel like we sort of really kept our hands on all the levers all the way through. I think we probably could have let them go a little bit more, and also kept it going for a lot longer. We did a big intensive project and we stopped for a bit, and then we got involved again with another optimization project. So we're sort of stopping and starting. A lot of that's through necessity. We're working for retail. Retail's all over the shop even before the unprecedented times. So we were still reacting to the market a fair bit about how much we could invest in this and being quite opportunistic. I think our developers and the product would have benefited more from holding an ongoing engagement to really continue to optimize the DevOps, optimize our hosting. We've talked about a few things for example for staging environments for some of our retailers, for the ability for them to be able to dynamically be switched on and off when they need them to be there, to just cost reduce a little bit more. Just a few things like that where I think they're not really part of the core product. They're very much a DevOps concern, but I think if we could have continued chipping away on those things, I would have preferred to do that in hindsight. But that said, it's been good to be able to pick it up again when we've needed to.
Yeah, and so there's a view I've heard sort of through a few back channels around the impact of COVID kind of accelerating essentially digital transformation. Given what you've kind of gone through, how do you see what you've done kind of setting yourself up for more rapid changes and sort of what you're leaning into?
Oh, look, if we hadn't have done this by now, it would have been parked for another 2 years. So I think we lucked out, I think, in getting this done first. I think because of this, we're now able to take advantage of a lot of the new capabilities that have come on the Google Cloud side of things that we're going to be able to take advantage of, a lot of new features and functionalities. And being able to come up with new features within the platform that we can deploy quickly to allow the brands that are using the platform to pivot has been hugely important. Like at the moment, we're looking at releasing a version of our profile portal, which was supposed to be designed for a customer just to be able to access their account when they're in a store without having to log into something using a password, just to see their history. Turning that into a mini contact tracing type app. So if restaurants or retailers want to use it to protect their customers and say, we know you're not going to buy anything today, but do you want to just check in you're here, rather than using some dumb clipboard or other manual process? It's all first party data anyway, so tracking that in there. So being able to come up with an idea like that, we might not have been able to do if we weren't set up to respond like that. But I think if anything, what I'm seeing from the COVID point of view is, it's not a, someone said it really well the other day. I'm not going to get it right, but it's an accelerant. It's not a change agent. All this has done is accelerate what's happening. It hasn't changed anything. I think the thing that I find interesting is whether it's going to be, there's two sort of groups of people wanting to pull it back towards what it was, whereas there's a lot of people saying, well, no, let's embrace the opportunity this has given us to finally change things. And I think if we do take that second option where it's an opportunity to change, it's about focusing on things that have a bigger impact. I think there's a whole lot of energy and movement in retail, but I mean, probably in the broader society, there's a whole lot of movement that keeps everything busy for no real gain, a whole lot of revenue, a whole lot of wheels turning, but not a whole lot of intentional profit and intentional effort that goes into helping us work less. Seeing the stuff coming out of even New Zealand saying, the 4-day work week, is something we should really think about. If not, what's the point of all this hard work of optimizing and automating things? Should it not be towards the idea that we shouldn't have to work so hard? So I think everyone's trying to fill this work gap and this effort gap, when I think the whole point is we're trying to get away from that. I think that's trying to be able to do more with less, as opposed to doing less with less is what we're trying to focus on. If that makes any sense. Probably doesn't make any sense. I'm just talking management.
It makes sense. Look, we didn't think we'd get into philosophy, but you can go there. What I find fascinating is that so many companies and technology departments, they're kind of stuck in the gear that they're in, and this actually, going through this change to kind of shift gears where you're releasing weekly, as you're kind of saying. It's been something that people have been able to now do for a number of years, but they've never quite got there. And so if you had to give anyone some advice on the sort of, with the things we've mentioned or other things, what would be that advice to try and, put together the case and then deliver that shift in gears to, essentially operate at a much faster clip?
Yeah, I think it's all down to sort of inertia, isn't it? It's this idea that this is not about. I mean, the term agile and to be reactive, I think, have become negative terms in a lot of ways, which I kind of agree with. I think the last thing you want to do is sit around and just wait for things to catch on fire and put them out, right? But I think to be intentionally reactive can be good. To be to take advantage and to take opportunities where they come. So the ability to have inertia, to make choices and act on those choices, and and then undo those choices. I think it's one thing to build up a capability so that you can react quickly, but reacting is still waiting for the universe to give you your cues, right? Whereas I think this is more about the idea that the market and the audiences out there seem to be rewarding those with a plan. And a plan, you need to be changing tires on the car while it's moving. So the whole idea is
no plan survives first contact, right? So it's
So you should be on the move. So it's not about the agility; it's more about the ability. Do you have the ability to create and execute a plan on the move? That's the whole thing. It's not necessarily about how fast you can do it, but can you? When you're in the board, like when you're having a boardroom meeting, don't stop and sit down. Let's walk and talk. Because the world's moving. I think that inertia of there's an opportunity, let's stop, let's think, let's plan, let's execute, let's do. And by the time you do, what you need to do is kind of moving, not fast, but I think that's the difference is an organization that now has the ability to plan and execute on the run in a very considered and intentional way, not a reactive way. And I think agile and reactive is, like I said, it's a negative connotation in some ways. It's about just being intentionally taking forward steps always. And if you don't have a development environment or a way that the team can be actively deploying things into market on an ongoing way without having to stop, break, and fully, stop everything.
Retest, revalidate, and then wait.
Yeah. Also, depending on the markets you're in too, I think if you're in retail where people aren't going to die if you get it wrong, I think that those sorts of brands have got even less of an excuse. I mean, if you're building heart monitoring systems and people will die if you get it wrong, then obviously you need a lot more protections in place. But if you're working in this space where, just getting something out there is more important than being able to fix things quickly, those sorts of ways of thinking, without being full Zuckerberg, break shit, mentality. I think you're still going to have some responsibility.
Yeah. Well, the Zuck is a whole special kind of conversation. I mean, one thing that we're trying to figure out and is this cross between it's a bit off topic, but that cross between the sort of the marketing tech world and customer experience, and how that ties in with the first party data around customers and what they bought from you, and how you've been servicing their services history and their contact preferences and those kind of things. What's your view on is that something you guys kind of across? Is that something that it gives you some value in terms of being on Google Cloud? What's your play?
Well, look, it's one of the main reasons why I was very, very dubious of moving on to Google in the first place, because I'm actually a bit of an anti-ad tech, marketing tech person to start with. I think marketing and advertising technology has got a lot to answer for with creating noise and wasted money, a lot of value flowing in the wrong direction. It isn't between brand and customer. And I should actually put this on before I talk too much about Google's marketing technology. So I don't want to, because they shouldn't be listening to me right now.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. This is my grade preps sort of marketing, his little project that he's working on today. I said, make Daddy a tinfoil hat, because I'm going to talk about Google marketing.
So our head of security actually has taken it a step further. He actually sits in a tin shed these days from COVID.
The Faraday cage to protect it.
That's not a joke.
No, look, I was originally really, really dubious about taking all of this, very intentionally first-party data that was supposed to be between a trusted, we're saving data on behalf of customers so they can have a better experience with the brands they care about. And that trust is, hugely important. And the last thing I wanted to do is, I had my sister-in-law telling me about how she's got some magnetic eyelashes. Magnetic eyelashes, they're little magnets inside the eyelashes, and you put this magnetic ferro paint on your eyes and it sticks to it. Crazy. But in my Instagram feed that night, I had, magnetic eyelash ads that I've never seen before. So, that whole tinfoil hat thing is a bit of a joke. But, I didn't want to think that, my brands and their trusted customers are sharing data with each other to create great customer experiences, all of a sudden would start impacting over on the other side of the Google fence, and AdWords would start being creepy instead of convenient. So we asked a lot of hard questions of Google really early in the piece to say, is there a real brick wall between A and B? And we got all those concerns covered, which is great. But that said, a brand is still a brand. A brand still wants to use the data it has about customers to reach over that fence and do interesting and amazing things in the ad tech and marketing tech world. So I think our job is to make sure that we are there about retention, that a brand that's got $10 to spend on their customer should give as much of that $10 to the customer, as opposed to an intermediary that's trying to take some of that value. So where you've got a direct connection, a direct line of communication, a direct chance of experiencing with customers, try to keep as much value as possible in that. That's our retention game. But that's not to say that you can't use concepts of lookalike audiences or remarketing when that customer disappears off your first party radar, that you can't use that ad tech weaponry to get them. As long as that, when the data passes between the two worlds, that contract of trust is understood by the brands. Yeah, exactly. They can all make choices.
The brand promise is not broken, and there's respect.
Exactly. The tech will let you do anything, and I think it's it's the tech platform's job to make all those choices available. So the fact that I can have a BigQuery database sitting over here that can connect directly to AdWords over there, of course you should be able to do that, but as long as the brands are making those choices with their eyes open and not, whereas at the moment, I think that without those sorts of explicit connections that Google have made available to us, people just install some remarketing pixel on their website, or let's just put the Facebook pixel on our website because it's free. We get some free reporting out of it, not realizing that they're leaking all of that data back into the network. This idea that you go to my brand's website, log into the website, and we can turn all the pixels off. So now we don't have to broadcast to the people that would advertise to you that you're now interested in sleepwear or whatever else, because we know you now, and we know you're interested in it because we know who you are. So I think this sort of stuff actually brings a whole lot of opportunity for brands to put the walls up around their ad tech for their known customers, for their best customers, but at the same time, when they do want to reach out into that ad tech land to do all those, to make those choices on their own terms, rather than just let the ad tech, suck the juice out of their customers. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Because at the moment it's the Wild West, and I think I personally think there's going to be quite the reckoning. I sort of the analogy I use is it's sort of like trust is the fossil fuels of the oil of the data world. That at the moment it's like we can just make as much plastic stuff as we like because there is no consequence. There is no consequence. Whereas now everyone realizes that there is a consequence as they're making choices about it. Whereas trust is the same thing. People just burn it. Who cares? I'll install 3 different apps on my website that are leaking customer data everywhere because there's no cost. But I think if customers start valuing their actual own data and their behavior more, which I think will happen, then they'll start going, well, no, you can't play loose with my data like that. And trust is a very hard thing to get back. So
yeah, I think it all comes down to hard to win, easily lost, right?
Exactly. Yep.
I'm conscious of some of the time, guys. There's a few really good questions that were there. So thanks to Phil. Do you want me to just shout them out? And,
go for it.
So some of them I think were kind of quick, just playing them through. So and I know the answer to some of these, but I'll leave it to your glory, Jenny. But the questions around instance per customer. So I believe that was actually the case prior to going into Google and wasn't necessarily before microservices. Was that how that played out? So it's
Yeah, so we've still got instances per customer, but what's happening is parts of the application are being now multi-tenant. So we've got multi-tenant components, but we've also got instance components for certain parts, and obviously databases are kept well and truly separate. So in our world, there is, whether they're at the moment, there's some physical brick walls between brand A and brand B and their customers' data, and even when we move into a more sort of consolidated view of that, there'll still be virtual brick walls between those two things. Danny at Arcade that joins MJ Bale that is completely separate from Danny at Arcade that joins Sportscraft. The two things are not connected in any way and never will be. Even if the architecture merges them together, the data itself is got brick walls between them.
Yeah, no, that's good. One of the other things I mentioned I think was really good was you mentioned 6 months to do the shift. So how much, and this is often a question as well, because we get this a lot, is around lift and shift versus app modernization. And I know it's lots of conversations we had, but it'd be good to get your answer to this as well, that how much re-architecture was done as part of the project versus before or after the move.
Well, we sort of combined 3 things. It was the lift and shift. It was a quick re-architecture and optimization. And it was including some new DevOps techniques, right? So we sort of got 3 things out of it. We got a DevOps pipeline that was far more sophisticated than what we had. We cleaned up a bit of our mess, which we could have cleaned up our mess in the old world. I think when it comes to, we do a lot of comms platforms and e-commerce platform re-architectures as part of our agency work. And often you say, you could spend half as much of this and just pay back your technical configuration debt on your existing platform. And you'll probably be in exactly the same position. But as bad as this sounds, sometimes it's hard to get everyone motivated to go up and spend 3 months cleaning up their own house. Why can't we just move to the new house and just torch the old one? From a motivation point of view, it's a legitimate thing. Even if apples for apples, the 2 platforms are pretty hard to separate, the act of moving sometimes is enough to motivate all the humans that actually need to be excited about this sort of work. So there definitely was a portion of this it wasn't just because only Google could do it and Amazon definitely couldn't do it. It was because the move itself was engaging and inspiring for people that wanted to lift their experience and lift their careers as well. So there's a bit of that. But yeah, we managed to sneak in some application modernization, some DevOps pipelining improvements, as well as the lift and shift in what theoretically we're still just budgeted for as a lift and shift to give us our hosting savings. So I think we managed to, always you have to be careful not to explode the project by trying to get too much of all of those things. But if you can be opportunistic in capturing a bit of value in those other 2 steps, then it's worth doing.
Yeah. So what were the sort of elements that kind of guided, those different components? How did you make them not fall out?
Yeah. Look, I think it's just about having just ongoing adult conversations every week, right? And I think you can't engineer this stuff too heavily up front, because you'll end up creating a whole lot of rules that everyone's going to resent as you're doing the work. It was just about making sure that during the process that we had our own checkpoints between the product managers, the devs, and myself, and the Servian guys, just going, do we want to push a DevOps pipeline to be even, because it felt like, for me as an outsider who doesn't understand all this DevOps stuff, it just felt like everything was just getting meta and meta and meta. There was a pipeline to manage the pipeline that manages the pipeline. It's like, man, you're just going to keep building that level of meta-ness until I can just press a keystroke at terminal to not even get out of bed in the morning. So it's about sort of just having those, letting people just play their cases in a bit of a very technical person, to the DevOps guys, to the product manager, and myself, just having to answer to each other from a logical point of view. Are we going to re-architect that bit or not? No, we don't need to do that yet. Let's just focus on the move. It's better to have a dozen clients across and not re-architect that component than having just 3 clients come across, because if we re-architect, they won't be able to come across. So it was always a negotiation. And I think having adult conversations that balance those things as you roll out lets you take advantage of those opportunities and kick the can down the road for the ones that will blow it out. But you've got to be open to them. Otherwise, if you make up all the rules at the start, then you just miss those opportunities.
Yeah. Cool. Pete, there are other questions there?
Yeah. So there's obviously a question, probably a little bit, I'll try and combine it as well. And question around when you're leveraging some of these things inside of even Google, and possibly even where you were with AWS, around some of the decisions you make about, and it's always one people worry about, lock into platform. Yeah. So if you go deeper in the PaaS and SaaS services, what does that mean? That's one part, and then the other part is around the education. So obviously, there's a lot of transfer that happened, a lot of communications that happened along the way. I think it'd be really good to understand how that education part worked. It's a big part of what we did. We talked about the Servian Academy, we had the Rado Academy, similar thing. So first of all, let's talk about lock-in, and then secondly, the education part.
Yeah, I mean, lock-in seems to happen at a lot of different levels. It's happening at the core hosting architecture, but also in the choices of the platforms. I think a lot of the parts that we've chosen, like Kubernetes and some of the other microservice components that they're using, the fact that we're moving into cloud functions, the guys are choosing to whether to write them in Python or Go. So that lock-in, we're sort of unpicking a lot of those other things that we were locked into anyway. So I think some parts will be easier to move than others, but I feel like now more than ever, we've actually got more choice and more freedom to move. Should some part of our stack not work inside the Google architecture, we've actually now got the capability to go outside of it if we need to. So I think if anything, it's reduced the lock-in capability. But let's, trying to get something that's completely fluid that you can just step in and out of without consequence is, it's a bit of a pipe dream. I think that doesn't exist. I think the idea is to lean into these relationships, not fear them. If you just stand back and don't want to commit to anything because of fear of lock-in, then you're going to miss out on the opportunities. I mean, it was partnering with Vibrato, partnering with Google, because Google came to the party and helped out with all of this too. So if you're worried about lock-in, then just lean into it. If you're going to be putting your feet in that concrete for now, then just take advantage of that fact, because the provider probably knows that too, and they'll come to the party if you ask. So I think lean into those perceived lock-ins and make sure you take advantage of all the things that those platforms will be offering, and make hay while the sun shines while you're using that platform. And when it's time to move, it won't come at zero cost, but when it comes time to move, it'll be bloody obvious why you have to. So worry about that then.
Yeah, I think one of the things we also did, Danny, obviously we looked at some stuff like Terraform. So whilst we don't look at agnosticity, it's about having a common language in place. And so one of the things we always talk about, it's not just Danny, with all organizations we speak to, is when they worry about lock-in, is to say you should always choose platforms and go deep with them. You have to take advantage of it. If you always think about lowest common denominator, you end up with the lowest common denominator. You don't take the advantage of the services you're buying into. That said, every single executive team will say, what if we want to move? Because they will, they've got to have that consideration. So two sort of things is that often what they're really after is, and we did this as well, Denny's, this is like the insurance policy. If you had to, here's the approach we would take. So as long as you at least detail, we know, and that's the approach you take. It's kind of like you have that piece of paper in your hand that you do it. And then instead of agnosticity, but even though we know that, to kind of simplify that move, at least at some of the levels, using common languages, like HashiCorp control language and Terraform and stuff like that. It provides the ability that if you ever did, you kind of have that path to do so. In some of the spaces, it's not for all of it, but yeah.
I think we're seeing that this same thing happen at a level up. When you talk about sort of headless commerce and the way we're treating, the way our agency's treating all our builds at the moment in the commerce territory, we're talking about headless commerce. We're building, basically the Terraform equivalent of front-end experiences that leverage the back ends of Shopify or BigCommerce or whatever else, but they're agnostic enough that it's not a zero cost move between them. But you're walking into a room where the exit is visible. Like you just got to make sure that there is a door out as much as there is in, and just make peace. But even trying to quantify what that exit's going to cost you is not realistic, because in 2 years' time, when you need to make that move, you might be moving to a thing that didn't exist 2 years ago. So that insurance policy that you've thought deeply about the concept of what you're building, your architecture in abstract, is probably more important. Like you say, because then you've abstracted the concept, and then it's a lot easier to change components of those, as long as the concept is your intellectual property. It's the way you've decided to architect an application is your IP. What you use to power it is just interesting.
Yeah, and that skills. I mean, just around the education piece as well and the transfer. So we did a bit around kind of our academy and live fire drills, so one of the things I know we found interesting was, and I want to know if you did, was we would get a consultant to pair with your team, and us in the kind of passenger seat and go, you drive it, and we'll just make sure you don't smash into a wall. You remember that sort of concept? So
yeah, definitely. Yeah. That was huge. And look, the guys got a whole lot of confidence, but they also know when the thing I like about at the moment is because of that experience we had with you guys, they're very confident on certain parts of it, but they know where they're not confident. Whereas I've seen, other situations where there's an equal level of confidence across all scenarios, and it's all just, we kind of know what we're doing, and we kind of know how to fix it should something go bad. But, at least in this setup, they know exactly what they can do really well, and they know when they're stepping outside of what they know. So we've had a couple of situations, even just recently, where we need to do something that we've never done before. We can't see it in our existing tooling how to do it. So let's go back to the team and just say, well, this new thing's come up and we need to work this way. And you guys go, well, it's super simple. It's just this and this and this. So now we've just grown in our capabilities by another notch. But the wall was very clear. So we knew what we knew. And whereas in the past, we kind of knew everything. We knew enough to be dangerous on all levels. And that's when mistakes happen, because you think you know what you're doing and then you don't. So, by having more clarity about what we do know and what we don't know is actually, a really good outcome for the team.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. There are a few more questions. I'm just conscious of time. I don't know who timekeeper is. I know that we.
Well, yeah,
we're 9 minutes.
We're about there.
Look, I think we covered a lot there. Thanks for the time. I'll hand to Andrew to do final remarks, but just personally for me, thanks for doing the project with us. Danny, it was good fun and good to continue working with you guys as well. And thanks for taking your time out for this as well. But over to you, Andrew. Sorry. Right?
Yeah, no. Look, Danny, again, thank you. Thank you for your time. I think that's really kind of nice to have a chat through, the journey and kind of, those trade-offs, which and those, it's always a nuanced kind of thing. Getting to going through those gears and getting to where you are. So, look, thank you again. I think, for anyone that's on the call, look, we'll be reaching out and there'll be some some material that can help sort of guide some of those decisions, and we're happy to come and have a chat.
I'll definitely open if anyone wants to get in touch and just to ask for sort of some candid feedback on how it all works, what's good, bad, and ugly. I mean, I think we've covered most of the stuff here, but if there's got any specific questions, or if they want to talk to some of my devs to go a bit deeper into some of the technical side of things, happy to be available for that. We're only a Zoom call away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, cool, guys. Well, we'll leave it there. All right. Thanks, Danny.
No
Thanks,
worries.
Pete.
Have a great day. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.